Life's a show, and we all play our parts.
Have you ever noticed that the conventionally attractive young blonde woman is always the victim in a horror movie? Well, by using meta-narrative techniques such as breaking the fourth wall and at one point launching out into a full-blown musical episode, Buffy the Vampire Slayer deconstructed the tropes of horror and showed us this didn't always have to be the case. Meta-narratives are any story where the characters know they are part of a fictitious world, and generally they allow us to explore the relationships between art, reality, and life. They date back to medieval times, and other examples include everything from the narrator in Arrested Development.
Your average American male is in a perpetual state of adolescence, Arrested Development.
Hey, that's the name of the show.
To Monty Python and the whole...
Get on with it! Yes, get on with it!
Sorry. Fucked Up's 2011 rock opera David Comes to Life is one such story. It's an album that follows the structure of a play, with its 18 tracks split into 4 acts and peppered with literary puns. Most reviews described it as a love story set in a factory in northern England, which is true, but that only really covers the first quarter of the album. The remaining runtime is spent with the characters in a Truman Show-style dilemma, realising they are trapped within the narrative of the play. The curtains part with a pulsing sound, similar to a work bell. It's clear immediately that we're entering a world that is oppressive and dark. We're introduced to both David, a world-weary worker crushed by his mundane life, and Veronica, a left-wing activist leafleting outside the factory gates. Veronica hands David a leaflet, and they instantly fall in love. It's a fairy tale meeting, and they seem like they have been created for each other, as they both describe the experience the same way from their separate perspectives. Veronica has lifted David out of his rut and opened his eyes to the beauty of life.
A wind has changed, and now we fly on the sweetest smells that I forgot. Now he looks forward to waking up. She's unstuck him from his rut.
However, when we switch to first-person narration halfway through the song, David tells us his experience of the romance is slightly different to that described by the prior third-person narration.
With a sentiment pending doom, it's all gonna end too soon. I'm too good to be true. Where the fuck is the other shit?
He begins to mistrust his happiness, as we begin to mistrust the narrator. Yes, he's happy, but he can't help but feel that his bliss will come crashing down around him.
Love the smell, but I hate the taste. Feeling good is such a waste. Love the book, but I hate the air.
As if on cue, Turn the Season ends the first act by announcing the passing of Veronica. Although she only makes a short appearance in the album, the fallout from her death will drive the rest of the narrative.
He knows it's death, it's part of life. You were made, that girl is white. It's out of the darkness, there's no dawn. Now she's gone.
So who is to blame for Veronica's death? Well, it's not long before the narrator is pointing fingers at our protagonist, David.
Like the wind that home to the flame. The back to her started the blaze. The match you made is to blame. The steps to love, the death were the same. I told you it was him, I tell her like it is. The story served its purpose, now look what he did.
David believes the narrator, and why wouldn't he? Narrators are usually unquestionable authorities in a story. As he doesn't know the exact details of Veronica's passing, David is left to conclude that he alone is culpable for her death.
Maybe it was my fault and I deserve to be upset. Maybe the price of being wrong is a lifetime of regret.
So that's it then? David has caused the death of the woman who brought him so much joy, and it's time to close the curtains and raise the house lights? Well, like most things fucked up, it's not that simple. A new character, Vivian, may help solve this problem. She warns us that Octavio, the narrator, is unreliable and not to be trusted. She describes him as a malevolent presence and explains that he has ulterior motives.
He's a whore with a slanted toe. He's a back without the bow. The teacher's on a crooked flow. Stuck inside the story alone. Heaven will let
With the narrator now confirmed to be unreliable, we see the play unravel and the characters enter into a meta-narrative as Octavio and David break the fourth wall and appeal directly to the audience. Octavio begins to take a different tact, foreshadowing the post-truth fake news demagoguery that came in the latter half of the decade. He shows that he is happy to distort the truth to achieve his ends. History is written by the victors, and Octavio intends to win. By way of contrast, David begins to realise his own futility. It was one thing to take an infallible narrator at his word, but now he sees Octavio as a vindictive presence who takes glee in dictating his fate, trapping him in the role of the villain. He berates the narrator for his careless telling of events that has led to so much harm. At the end of the third act, David is left forlorn, anguished, and dejected. Despite his protestations, Octavio remains in control of the story, and David is powerless to do anything about it. Well, it's time for Vivian to shake things up again. Through a dump of exposition, we learn that she witnessed the factory explosion, that David is in fact innocent, and it's Octavio who is culpable for Veronica's death. This surely makes Octavio the bad guy then. Well, he doesn't think so. In much the same way that Octavio can shape David's reality, his own path is set in stone thanks to Fucked Up's writing pairing of 10,000 Marbles and Pink Eyes. They cast him as the villain, and he has no more control over his fate than David does. But who do Fucked Up write for, if not an audience? Stories are created to be passed on, and would anyone even pay attention to this one if there wasn't an element of tragedy to it? So we have David and Vivian blaming Octavio, Octavio blaming the authors and the audience, but can we take it further? What about the record company? Are they culpable for contracting Fucked Up to write this album? Or maybe the critics for expecting Fucked Up to be even more ambitious and genre-busting than in their breakthrough album, The Chemistry of Common Life? The point is, this probably goes beyond the simple concept of good guys and bad guys, and it's definitely not something that worries David at the end of the album. When he learns of his innocence, he's faced with a dilemma. Given that the play will restart again the next night, he knows he will have the joy of meeting Veronica again, but he'll also have to face the anguish of losing her. He has to ask, is it worth putting himself through the turmoil all over again for fleeting moments of joy? Can he face the criticism and negativity for trying to maximise his happiness in life? Ultimately, he decides he can.
I go through it again. I would embrace the pain. If it gave me the chance for this one glance of you in my heart to hold in my brain.
So as the album ends, we hear that same work bell tolling, calling David back to the factory and to the start of the story for a new performance to a new audience the next night. Remember that meta-narrative framing? Well, one benefit of that technique is that it allows us to put ourselves into the story and begin to understand the narratives of our own lives. Good guys, bad guys. Life isn't such a simple, neat story. While we can be pretty sure that our lives aren't controlled by a malicious, unreliable narrator, our ultimate destiny is influenced by our background, identity, economic situation, and all sorts of other factors that take away our control. What we can control is our outlook. We're encouraged to be like David, to embrace the happiness when it comes, and weather the bullshit that comes in between. Bad times are inevitable, but it's the happiest times that will ultimately define our stories.